Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theater Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, Robin Hood Radio's very own critic. He joins us weekly. The films, The Janes, Navalny, and Top Gun Maverick. We're waiting. Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, Jill. You sound enthusiastic about that last one.
Well, since you so typically, you are not always on the. What's the word I'm looking for? That wouldn't necessarily be the first film I would send you to.
Yeah, and I very often sort of don't favor the movies with the gigantic ads in the paper. But hey, they're movies too, and this one definitely deserves some attention. It's been out for a little while. It took me a little while to catch up with it. But I'd like to start by calling attention to a couple of movies with lower profiles, which are vastly more serious than the new Top Gun movie, and which have a lot of things to teach us, and which are documentaries, so they are nonfiction films. And again, I just really want to make sure that people know about these because they are very interesting and good movies. The first one is called The Janes, and that is referring to a number of women who for a while referred to themselves by the name Jane. Each one of them would sort of use that name. It was sort of a code name. And what these women did back in the late 60s and into the early 1970s was to help women who were desperate for care get abortions. And so that's what this movie is about. So, this movie plugs really into today's concerns as we wait to see exactly what the Supreme Court of the United States is about to do regarding abortion. This goes back to the time when abortion was legal just about every single place it was illegal just about every single place in America. And these women got together, they sort of found each other in different ways, and they decided that they really had to help women who desperately needed abortions and simply couldn't get them anywhere. They couldn't afford them. They couldn't find anybody who would do them. Again, it was illegal. It was a felony. You would be in really serious trouble if you were connected with providing abortions. So these women decided that they would help. And they used all kinds of things that we associate maybe with espionage situations. They had a place that they called the front where their clients would come and gather, and then another place which they called the place where the procedure would actually be performed, and then back to the front again and so forth. And oh my gosh, they had safe houses and they had all these kinds of things. Now, one of the interesting things about this movie, The Janes, which by the way was directed by the team of Tia Lesson and Emma Pildes, one of the interesting things about it is that it really doesn't get into the philosophical questions of abortion. When does human life begin, and is the fetus a person, and this kind of thing. There's a teensy little bit of touching on that, but mainly this movie is about very practical solutions to a very practical problem, and about how these women, again, this was something that was totally illegal throughout the United States, about how they courageously decided to provide this service. And the movie takes this point of view, that this was a very practical decision by these women, and they were helping other people who desperately needed this kind of help, and that's what it's all about, and that is what the movie is all about. So it takes us through the story of the Janes, how they got together, how they came about doing these things. One person who was interviewed in the movie is a man who for a while was doing abortions for them. He was not an MD, although they sort of thought he was a medical doctor. But he provided a lot of abortions, and eventually he got tired of doing it. He appears to be a rather irresponsible sort, actually, and taught them how to do it, and they started doing it themselves. And again, from everything that they say, it appeared to be a fairly easy procedure to do, and they did it with really very little in the way of ill effects for quite a long while. There are some interesting historical markers that come along in the course of this documentary, which is telling the story. One happens when New York State made abortion legal. And that changed a lot of things because now women who had some money could fly to New York or take a train or somehow get to New York and get an abortion legally there. And that changed the activity of the Janes somewhat. And of course, the whole thing pivots on eventually in 1972, Roe versus Wade, which really, really altered the abortion situation in the United States drastically, as we all know. And what is fascinating here is that the Janes did this work for several years without ever getting in trouble with the law. And at least one commentator in the movie says the authorities must have known what was going on and just decided to turn a blind eye because they were helping people who sometimes, were the daughters or wives or girlfriends of people they knew. So apparently the Janes got away with this for a long time, partly because a blind eye was turned. But then yet they got caught and they were arrested and they were in trouble. Several of them were, not every single one. And then what happens, and this is just so remarkable, and of course it's near the end of the movie, Roe versus Wade gets declared by the Supreme Court. Abortion is now legal, and the charges against them were dropped at the last minute. So it's as dramatic as anything you come across in a fiction movie. Anyway, that's what the Janes is about, and whatever one's own personal view of abortion is. It's just a really fascinating historical record. But again, more than the filmmakers perhaps realized when they were making this movie, which has just come out this year, the movie is so totally relevant to concerns in the United States today. So I totally recommend it. It's streaming. You can find it easily. The Janes are really, really, it's a very conventional movie, by the way. As movie making, there's nothing exciting about it at all. It's a talking heads documentary. But the material that it is covering is absolutely fascinating. And I can say much the same about my second documentary for today, Jill, Navalny, which is made by the filmmaker Daniel Roher. And it is about the Russian dissident, Alexei Navalny, who at this very moment is being held apparently in a high security prison, maximum security prison in Russia. And he has a fascinating story, and that is what this movie provides, including a lot of footage of Navalny himself. So we really get to see him, get a sense of what he's like. We certainly discover what his views are. And we get a sense from seeing his charisma in this documentary about how he has become such a charismatic Russian leader. And of course, that is why he is in so much astonishing trouble nowadays. Anyway, he's been a dissident in Russia for quite a long while. He has run for office in Russia. He has been a very, very high profile figure in Russia, very much against Vladimir Putin and his regime. And of course, Vladimir Putin and his regime have been outraged by this. And so Navalny and his activities are right at the center of this movie throughout. And what happened was that almost 10 years ago, he got in trouble with the law and was given a suspended sentence for embezzlement of all things. And he still managed to run for office, and he did pretty well. And then the same thing sort of happened all over again. But he would not stop what he was doing. And then back a couple of years ago from now, Navalny was poisoned by what appeared to be the Novichok nerve agent, probably by the government, probably by Putin's gang. And he was incredibly ill, and everybody expected him to die immediately. That was the whole point of poisoning him, was that, yes, he was expected to simply succumb immediately on a flight that he was on a plane. But the plane managed to turn around in time, managed to get him back down to Earth in time. He was medically evacuated, ended up in Berlin, and after about a month, he was out of the hospital. And all of that is covered very, very closely in this movie. And, of course, Navalny immediately went on the rampage against Putin, saying, this is the person who poisoned me. There was a lot of evidence to sort of support that idea, at least there appeared to be. But Navalny then decided, and this was incredibly courageous of him, he decided that he would go back to Russia. And again, I got to remind you, this sounds like movies, but it's all real stuff. And immediately on touching ground in Russia again, he was arrested, and he is still under arrest now. And apparently he has been transferred just within recent weeks to a maximum security prison, which is known for totally mistreating people there. And that's where he is now. And of course, the movie, even though it came out this year, can't get into that. What this movie does is it gives you really the story of Navalny, about how he became such an important dissident, about why he has had such success. We see a lot of footage of him, often talking directly to the camera, and we really get a sense of how he has become such a an influential figure in Russia, and certainly from that influence, we can certainly easily assume why Putin has such rage against him always. And the outcome of his story ultimately remains unknown, although right now things look very grim for him. It is not clear how he will ever get out of his current predicament of being in a maximum security prison and hated by the head of the country and all of that. But the movie, again, doesn't deal with that particular, with these latest developments. It deals with his rise, with his importance in Russia, with his ideology, with his ideas, with his politics, and with his very, very bold and brave stances against Putin and what Putin stands for. And right now, I would expect that would be a very popular thing in the United States, to be supporting the work of this marvelous dissident. Anyway, Navalny is a very, very lucid and easy to follow documentary. Again, it's very conventional in its filmmaking, but it really gives you the background. It really gives you the story, and it's very dramatic at certain points, and I just totally recommend it. Again, you can pretty easily find it. It's streaming all over the place, and both the Janes and Navalny, named after real people and about real people, are very, very worth seeing. But if it is sheer escapism that one is after, then one might certainly go and see Top Gun Maverick. This is a film which has gotten such glowing reviews and such glowing notice and such glowing praise from so many people, and I rather enjoyed it. You know, I'm certainly not against it. It's a very insubstantial movie, but hey, you know, we need these two, or at least we've certainly got these two. And as sort of pure entertainment escapist movies go, I've certainly seen a whole lot worse in my many decades of movie going. This is, of course, a long-delayed sequel to the movie Top Gun, made by the late Tony Scott way back in 1986. And I looked at it again recently, and, you know, I always have found it underwhelming, but, you know, it's not a bad little picture. We have, of course, Tom Cruise starring in this film as an incredibly gifted person who is in this school. It's actually a school, an Air Force school, which is called Top Gun, and the people who are the students there are called Top Guns. And, you know, Tom Cruise plays a young man whose his code, or what do they call it? His flight sign, or whatever they call the thing, is Maverick. That's how he's known. They all have names other than their real names. There's the Iceman, played by Val Kilmer, and Merlin, played by Tim Robbins in the original film. There's Goose, played by Anthony Edwards, and yes, Tom Cruise is Maverick, and he is the main character. And then his various crewmates and so forth are also in Top Gun, and it's about their exploits and their adventures, and they're young rapscallions, but they're incredibly talented at what they do, and they learn how to fly, and they do all kinds of bold things and all of that. So Top Gun Maverick is this long-delayed sequel to that movie, and of course, the subtitle, Maverick, is the Tom Cruise character. And yep, Tom Cruise is back again. It's been more than 30 years since the previous film, or since the events of the previous film, but he is still known as Maverick, and he is back now, and he doesn't want to be back. He by now, and the movie makes this very clear at the beginning, the new movie, Top Gun Maverick, by now he should be a 2-star admiral, one of the other characters tells him. But why? So why is he still, you know, flying and he's a test pilot is what he is. Why is he doing that? Well, because that's what he likes to do, that's what he loves to do, and that's what he's good at doing, and he doesn't want to sit behind a desk, and he doesn't want to be in charge of things. He just wants to do his work of being a test pilot and risking his life and helping develop these new airplanes and all that kind of thing. Okay. But due to a course of events which I will not reveal, he ends up back at Top Gun, being an instructor there now. He said, I don't want to be an instructor. That's not what I want to do. But no, they say you've got to be an instructor, and that's what you have to do. And so he comes back into contact with a couple of the people who we knew way back when in the first film, particularly Val Kilmer as the Iceman. And I'll get back to him in a moment. But other people who he runs into there and who are important characters in the movie, all those secondary characters, particularly John Hamm as an admiral, who is very, very rough and gruff and tough, and has very skeptical of the Tom Cruise character and why he is there, and why he is always breaking rules and bending regulations and not doing what he's told. So, and John Hamm is a good actor, and he's very, very marvelous in this role. But anyway, we have Maverick's interactions with these various characters. teachers and the students under him, the brass above him. And of course, eventually we come to some incredibly brave, bold fighting scenes, which involve a raid on a nuclear facility in an unnamed country. The movie is very discreet in that regard, but we get all the logistics of it. We find out what they have to do and why it's so important and why it's so incredibly dangerous for them. And of course, at the end, the big mission finally takes place, and that provides the climax of the film. One of the fascinating elements of this movie is that it does have Val Kilmer as his beloved character Iceman from the first film. Here, he's even more of a secondary character. And of course, Val Kilmer, and you can see a recent documentary about him for more detail on this, has been very, very ill for a while and can barely speak. So how do they cover that in this movie? They have him playing a very, very ill character who can barely speak. Poor Iceman has gotten old, he has gotten sick, and he can barely speak. Some of his dialogue is tapped out on a computer, and then for a little while he is able to croak out a few words of dialogue. And it's good to see Val Kilmer, who himself is very sick, play this role and play it, of course, very convincingly and persuasively and in a way charismatically. Mainly, this is Tom Cruise's movie. I have to say that after decades of skepticism about Tom Cruise, I think he's finally turning into a real actor. He does some things, just a few things in this movie that strike me as being very, very smart and even moving acting. And so that, if for no other reason, is a good reason to see Top Gun Maverick. Oh yeah, there's a lot of thrilling action as well. So I had a pretty good time watching it, and I think a lot of other people will have a very good time watching it. So that is my variegated story this week, Jill.
For which we thank you. David Sterritt, Films in Focus, the films The Janes, Navalny, and Top Gun Maverick.